Okay, it's week 8. That means midterm. Anyhow, if you've been watching these, and I know at least 3 or 4 of you have been, we are this week going to continue the same type of thing I've been doing these last few weeks, where I ask you to take the week's readings and extrapolate from them into your own personal life, or into, taking the fiction and seeing the ways that it might apply in reality, the non-fictional world. So if you have looked at the checklist for this week or looked at the readings, and I'm sure you have, for you are dedicated, devoted rock stars, you will see that you're going to read Dead Men's Path by Chinua Achebe, The Lemon Orchard by Alex Laguma, and The Return by Ngugi wa Thiong'o. And so for each of these stories, I'm going to go ahead and give you kind of a question stemming out of the story that might prompt you into just deeper consideration, and perhaps the development of the kind of empathy that you can get from reading literature, where you learn about people who are different from you or who have gone through different circumstances in their life, and you see the ways that you can identify with it or sympathize with the things that they are dealing with. So in the story, Dead Men's Path by Chinua Achebe, we see 2 well-intentioned characters, Michael and Nancy, coming into a village kind of as outsiders, and they are full of vim and vigor for new things and transforming the place and really updating things and bringing in sort of modern ideas to this place that seems locked in tradition and the past. And so the story sets up kind of a cultural conflict between old and new. There's that clash always, as we know in our own lives, between generations or between new ways of doing things. I mean, technology certainly has brought in changes that are sometimes difficult for those who are traditionalists. I would give an example. If I'm thinking about where in my life can I see cultural conflicts between old and new, I would say that there's some discomfort in my life between watching my mom use Facebook. She should never have gotten on Facebook. And so the idea of social media with older generations who grew up first just speaking face to face, and during their lifetimes went to the telephone, eventually were able to adapt to the computer or email, and then social media came in and set all these new ways of functioning, and became these new sources of information where if you aren't keeping a diligent eye out, you can get, I don't want to say radicalized, but let's just say if you're getting all your political information from social media, you should stop doing that. But anyhow, so I can see, kind of a rub there between the modernity of social media and how it is set up as a communication platform, and the sort of older ways of thinking that my mom brought to it. And it's resulted in a really difficult relationship in my life. So I would ask you, when you consider the idea of cultural conflicts between old and new, what examples can you come up with? Perhaps it's something very intensely personal in your life, or perhaps it's just, larger things that you notice, it used to be this way, now it's this way. And it's created kind of an uncomfortable chafing culturally. And the second story this week is The Lemon Orchard by Alex Laguma, which is a terrible, taut, atmosphered kind of story. There's a big sense of foreboding. We don't really know how it turns out in the end, but it seems pretty grim for a man who is essentially innocent. And in a way, it's a classic story of racism, because we have a group of, let's be honest, terrible white people who are inflicting trauma and violence upon a Black man. And in terms of the historical context, this is in South Africa during the time of apartheid, which is one of the world's biggest examples of institutionalized racism. And we like to act as though it's something that ended and is in the past. But truly, if you're a good critical thinker, you know very well that institutionalized racism, not only in South Africa, for example, but in our own country, is alive and well. So there's a lot that you could unpack from this story. So I actually had trouble coming up with what question I wanted to ask. But one other thing that you can notice sort of on a literary level about this story is that it's just chock full of paradoxes. So we have a Black man who is well educated, who's a professional, and he is being taken perhaps to his death by a group of pretty uneducated and ignorant and unprofessional white men. And so we see, there's a bizarre hierarchy there that's, like the people who are less intelligent and aren't as good of thinkers are the ones with guns. And the person who's receiving the violence and the trauma is the one who's a better thinker and clearly a better person. So there's some paradoxes there. If you look at the story closely, you'll notice a paradox, like the leader of the group of white men. He's dressed kind of as a hunter, and he is clearly the leader, except physically, it's sort of described, he hangs back and puts himself at the back of the pack of them. So there's a paradox there between the power he's trying to assert for himself and the actual way he, stations himself physically. So I think anytime you slow down and think about your own life or the world that's around you, it can be very interesting to consider what examples can you come up with of paradoxes in your life that can reveal hidden layers. I have an interesting paradox. I was trying to think of examples and for myself. Like, I am actually a very hard worker. I will put in the hours. I will redo a thing until it's right and perfect. And yet I hate going to work. I never have wanted a job that was like an 8 to 5 or, 9 to 5 kind of job. I don't want traditional hours. So the idea of what Americans consider like a normal work life is antithetical to everything that I am, which sort of implies that I'm not a hard worker. Also, I'm a real night owl. I'm not a morning person. So I can go to sleep at 2 or 3 a.m. and sleep until 11 or noon. If I don't set an alarm, it'll be almost noon before I wake up. And we also have that in our brains, or at least a lot of Americans do when we think of like work ethic. We have it in our brains that, early to bed and early to rise is, and the early bird gets the worm, all that kind of stuff. And so it's sometimes hard for people to know what to make of me because I am paradoxical in that I can sleep until noon and I never want to go into a job, but I'm a really hard worker. So I would ask you to consider that for yourself. In what ways are you paradoxical, or what kinds of paradoxes can you find in the world as you look around yourself? And then the third story this week is The Return by Ngugi Wa Thiong'o, sorry. And in a way, it's a very classic tale. The themes, even though they are set perhaps in a country or an environment you personally haven't experienced, or maybe you have, the themes are universal. I mean, we have a story of, so maybe you could say, a prodigal son returning home. And so that idea of homecoming and finding the place changed. And then we also have themes of betrayal, where you realize someone screwed you over. And the whole tone of that story is kind of melancholy. So I came up with a couple questions that you could consider here. Consider the idea of what does it mean to go home again? So after you left a place that felt like home to you for an extended stretch, and then you return home. Have you ever experienced a return to a place and then realized it just doesn't feel the same? I mean, I know a lot of people say that when they return to their childhood homes, it just feels too small. Like the rooms feel smaller, the whole place feels smaller. You drive up to your childhood home and you think, but it was like not a palace, but it felt so big when I was a kid, and now you look around and you're like, it was kind of nothing. So that's a little bit sometimes sobering for people. So I'm talking there in that example about returning to an actual house, but home is many things. So think of the different ways that we experience home too. Sometimes home is people. I mean, I realized, I grew up in a house that my parents lived in from before I was born until I was 24, and then they moved to a new house, and I was distraught because I was like, but that house is my home, but it's very important. And then the first time I came back to visit after they had moved, I realized, oh, it didn't matter at all because my parents are home, my home. You know, wherever my parents are was going to feel like home, and it didn't really it wasn't bound to the house or the physical space. So consider that question about, you know, going home again and considering the changes. A second possible thing you might want to think about with your own life, it's an inevitable part of human nature that we're going to disappoint and often betray each other. Have you ever experienced betrayal? And if so, I'm so sorry, Buttercup. I hope you're okay. And then what did you learn about yourself or learn about how to function in the world from the way that you dealt with that betrayal? So these are things that you could, you know, kind of contemplate as you're washing dishes. And I want to say here at this juncture that this is your one and only extra credit opportunity in this class. If you would like to respond to one of the questions I have posed in this video, because I know so few of you are watching these videos, so if you're someone who's been watching them and you would like 10 extra credit points, that's the equivalent of an entire discussion, you know, on one of the stories. So let's say you missed one in a previous week where you were like, had a bad week and you didn't get your post done. This can help you recoup some of those points. So if you would like 10 extra credit points, you can email to me 300 to 500 words answering one of the questions I have posed in this video. So if you send it to me before the end of the semester, I will bump your grade with those extra 10 points. And you would be surprised, so very often a final grade comes down to the difference of like 2 points, even though it's like, well, there's 400 points possible in the class or whatever. Sometimes if a student had 1 or 2 points more, their grade, it would be enough to tip their percentage up to the next grade. So fight for whatever you can get. And if you have been watching these videos, kudos to you for thinking, I want to avail myself of every possible educational opportunity, even when it means I have to sit through Jocelyn blathering and blathering for 12 minutes when she could have said it in 3. You are a hero. Anyhow, if you want extra credit, this is your one and only chance. So send me an email, 300 to 500 words, 300 to anywhere from 300 to 500 words, which is, you know, not even a page necessarily, and answering one of these questions. And I actually think it'd be really cool because I personally am quite interested in what your responses would be. So go for it, friends.